Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Angela McClellan, and I'm blessed to serve here at the National Center for Padre Pio as the Director of Faith Formation and Evangelization. So, in this presentation on the children of Fatima, I'll be offering you a brief biographical sketch of the three children of Fatima: Jacinta, Francisco, and Lucia, and exploring how these children responded to the apparitions of Our Lady and what they can teach us. So let's begin with Francisco Marto. Francisco was born on June 11th, 1908, and was the 10th of 11 children of Manuel and Olympia Marto. His cousin Lucia described him as having exemplary obedience to his parents and as being patient, kind, reserved, and inclined to silence. He liked nature and music and accepted losing at games or even giving in just to avoid conflicts and arguments. He was a bit mischievous at times and was known to drop inedible objects into his sleeping brother's mouth. When he was once asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, he simply replied, "I don't want to be anything. I want to die and go to heaven." Francisco, along with his younger sister Jacinta, who we'll speak about next, became gravely ill during the global flu pandemic of 1918. 2 days before his death, Francisco made his first Holy Communion, and on the day of his death, around 10 in the morning, he told his mother, "Look, Mama, that beautiful light by the door." Francisco died in his home on April 4th, 1919, at the age of only 10. Because of their closeness in age, Jacinta suffered much because of her brother's death. Jacinta Marto was born on March 11th, 1910, and was 2 years younger than her brother Francisco. She was the youngest of the Marto family. Jacinta was pretty, energetic, and as her cousin Lucia described her, full of life and joy. And like many children, was prone to pouting at times and willfulness in getting her own way. She loved to dance and to gather flowers, making them into garlands for Lucia. While she had many friends, she had a special affection towards her cousin Lucia. She also loved the sheep that she and her brother and cousin tended and gave each one a name. She once tried to carry a lamb home on her shoulders because she had seen a picture of the Good Shepherd doing so. When she was only 5 years old, she was moved to tears upon hearing the story of Jesus' passion, and she, along with her brother Francisco, never learned to read or write. Jacinta was also quite talkative. In fact, after the first apparition, the children had promised each other that they would not say a word about it to anyone. But Jacinta, bubbling over with excitement, had let it slip to her family, who then shared it with some of their close village neighbors. So, with each passing apparition, more and more people traveled to the cova. First, just 50 people, then 2,000, 15,000, and finally about 50 to 70,000 were reported. Jacinta was so sorry that she promised never to reveal another secret. Even when the government authorities took the children into custody and threatened them with death if they didn't declare the Fatima apparitions false, Jacinta told Lucia and Francisco, "Don't worry, I won't say anything this time. I'd rather die first." During the time of the apparitions of Our Lady to the children, as you can imagine, many people flocked to the children to ask them for their prayers and for Mary's intercession. On one occasion, a mother implored Jacinta to pray for her son who had disappeared. A few days later, the son returned home and recounted the story of being lost in the woods after escaping from prison. As he knelt and prayed, he saw Jacinta taking him by the hand and leading him to a path which she indicated to him to follow. Whether this was an example of Jacinta bilocating, we are not certain. Jacinta was asked if she actually went to find the young man. She said she did not, but that she did pray to Our Lady for him. Jacinta became ill with an epidemic of bronchopneumonia in December of 1918, and shortly after, she developed pleurisy. Our Lady came to Jacinta and told her that she would soon enter a hospital and suffer much. Mary told her to embrace all for the love of Jesus, for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for the offenses committed against her heart and the heart of her son Jesus. The Blessed Mother told Jacinta that her mummy would accompany her to the hospital, but later she would be alone. In the first hospital, she underwent painful treatments for 2 months. When she returned home, she had a large wound in her chest, requiring daily medication. Due to lack of hygiene, the wound became infected and developed into a real torment for Jacinta, but she never complained. In fact, she tried to hide her sufferings in front of her mother. She even consoled her mother by telling her she felt better. As a side note, Saint Maria Goretti, whose feast day we celebrate in July, did the very same thing when she was dying in order to spare her mother from suffering on her account. I emphasize this to illustrate the virtuous courage that both these young children showed in the face of great physical pain and suffering. During Jacinta's illness, she confided to Lucia, "I suffer much, but I offer everything for the conversion of sinners and to make reparation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary." Jacinta was taken for further care to a Catholic orphanage in Lisbon, where she was able to attend Mass and see the tabernacle, but her stay there was very brief. She was then transferred to a second hospital in Lisbon, never to return home again. On the evening of February 20th, 1920, Jacinta requested the last sacraments. While the priest heard her confession, he did not offer her Holy Communion because he did not see the urgency. She died shortly after, at the age of 9, only a few weeks before her 10th birthday, alone, as Mary said she would be. When Jacinta's coffin was opened in September of 1935, her face was seen to be perfectly incorrupt. Her body and that of her brother Francisco lie in the Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary in Fatima, with the simple description, "Here lie the mortal remains of Francisco and Jacinta, to whom Our Lady appeared." Francisco and Jacinta were beatified by Pope St. John Paul II in May of 2000 and canonized by Pope Francis on May 13, 2017, the 100th anniversary of the first apparition of Our Lady of Fatima to the children. Francisco and Jacinta are the youngest non-martyred children to be canonized in the Catholic Church. And finally, Lucia dos Santos, the cousin of Francisco and Jacinta. Lucia was born on March 28, 1907, and she was the youngest of 7 children of Antonio and Maria dos Santos. They were a peasant family, however, they did own land. And actually, the place where the apparitions took place in the Cova, a property owned by Lucia's father, was located about 1.5 miles from Fatima. Mary always appeared near noon on an oak tree only about 39 inches high. So when you see photos or statues of Our Lady of Fatima, I often ask myself, why is she appearing on that little tree? It was, in fact, a very small tree. As I said, only 39 inches. It looked more like a bush than a full-grown tree. Lucia loved to tell stories and to compose songs. As a small child, she providentially wrote songs called "In Heaven I'll Be with My Mother," "I Love God in Heaven," and "Lady of Carmel." After her first confession, as she prayed in front of the altar of Our Lady of the Rosary, she saw the statue smile at her. And if you recall, Saint Teresa of Lisieux had a similar experience when she was a young child. As Teresa was sick and lying in her bed, she saw a statue of Our Lady smiling at her as well. Lucia was given special permission to receive her first Holy Communion at the age of 6 rather than 10. Her parish priest refused at first, but then a visiting Jesuit interviewed her after finding her in tears that day and concluded that she had a better understanding of the real presence of Jesus than most people had. Lucia recounted in her memoirs that after her first Holy Communion, I lost all taste and attraction for the things of the world and only felt at home in some solitary place where, all alone, I could recall the delights of my first Holy Communion. Lucia suffered from beatings, ridicule, and disbelief from her own mother during the time of the apparitions. She especially could not believe or wrap her head around the fact that Our Lady had appeared to Lucia and had asked Lucia to learn to read and write. This is particularly sad and strange because her mother was able to read and write. And of course, there was a purpose to Mary's request for her to do this. Lucia was to be the messenger for all that occurred and for all that was conveyed by the Blessed Mother during the apparitions. Mary told her, "Jesus wishes to use you in order to make me known and loved." There is evidence, on the other hand, that Lucia's father made sure that Lucia got to the Cova each month, even after his wife had forbidden Lucia to go. So we can see that tension within Lucia's own family of disbelief versus belief. In 1928, at the age of 14, Lucia became a boarder in the school of the Sisters of St. Dorothy. She later entered their convent and eventually professed her final vows in 1934 at the age of 27. In March of 1948, so 14 years later, at the age of 41, Lucia receives papal permission to be relieved of her perpetual vows as a sister of St. Dorothy and to enter the Discalced Carmelites of St. Teresa in Coimbra. She made her final profession as a Carmelite in 1949 at the age of 42. Throughout her religious life, Lucia, known as Sister Maria Lucia of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart, continued having visions of the Virgin Mary and hearing messages from her. Lucia died on February 13th, 2005, at the age of 97. For a period prior to her death, she could neither see nor hear. And just as a side note, Pope John Paul II died only 2 months later, on April 2nd, 2005. Even in death, we can see that there was a close spiritual and mystical connection between both of them. On February 13th, 2008, Pope Benedict XVI waived the 5-year waiting period before opening her cause for beatification. And on February 13th, 2017, Sister Lucia was accorded the title Servant of God, the first major step toward her canonization. So now, just briefly, I want to take a look at the lives of these 3 children and explore what they can teach us. First of all, they teach us that holiness does not depend on one's age. Lucia was 10, Francisco 9, and Jacinta only 7 at that first appearance of the Blessed Mother, at that first apparition. So I want you to just pause for a minute. Those of us who are parents, grandparents, catechists, teachers, I want you to think of what children of those ages, spiritually and developmentally and physically, look like. That is a very young age, 7, 9, and 10. We must believe in the spiritual potential and sensitivity of children and not underestimate it. We should strive to do everything in our power to expose children to the things of God. Regular attendance at Sunday Mass, prayer in the home, even if it's simply grace before meals, exposure to books about Mary, the angels, the saints, visits to different churches and shrines, stations of the cross, particularly outdoor stations as a family that you combine with another activity like a picnic. Homes that are characterized by great faith and devotional practices lead children to encounter Jesus. This is how saints are born. So again, we don't become saints because we're rich or poor, old or young, educated, not educated, because of our race or ethnicity. That matters not to God. We are called to be saints by virtue of our baptism. We're all called to sanctity and holiness of life. I always like to tell the story of Padre Pio, how one day a little Italian nun came over to him and yanked the rosary from his cincture, and she ran off with it. And he must have been pretty fed up that day because he ran after her and he caught up to her. And he said, "Sister, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, Padre, I just wanted a relic." And Padre Pio said, Look, sister, go back to your convent and make your own relic." That's what he was trying to teach, sister. That by virtue of our baptism, God is calling us to holiness. It's universal, and one can attain it at any age by possessing a relationship with Jesus Christ and a desire to be his missionary disciple. God will use everything about us, even our weaknesses, to help us scale the heights of holiness. God will use all that he created us to be on our path to holiness if we are open and receptive to his graces, just as those little children of Fatima were. Number two, they teach us the importance of prayer and the power of the rosary. When Padre Pio was asked how he wanted to be remembered, he replied as a priest who prayed. Prayer is what builds our relationship with Jesus Christ. It's much easier to talk to God, isn't it, rather than to sit in silence and listen to him. Just as listening is an indispensable component of communication, it's an essential element of prayer. Prayer is never one-sided. The rosary in particular provides us with an opportunity to silence our hearts while meditating on the rosary and the mystery of each rosary in each decade. The Blessed Mother told the children in the first apparition that they would go to heaven, but Francisco had to pray many rosaries first. When Francisco's coffin was opened in 1952, the rosary that had been placed in his hands at death was found embedded in his fingers. Is our rosary embedded in our fingers? They teach us the necessity of spiritual fortitude. There's much good in the world, but there's also much evil. 30 minutes of nightly news will surely convince us of that. We must possess a certain amount of courage to combat the evil and to remain strong in our moral convictions. To do that, we must be well versed in our faith and model our faith in the way that we live. The children of Fatima remained strong in their faith, even when they were mocked, harassed, arrested, and thrown into prison with common criminals. A 10, 9, and 7-year-old thrown into prison with adult criminals. Think about that. And do you know what happened? Those prisoners were converted and began to pray with the children. And number 4, they teach us about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. United States Conference of Catholic Bishops have initiated a 3-year Eucharistic revival. In fact, that revival official period just ended in June on the Feast of Corpus Christi. And they did that to renew our faith and reverence for Jesus' real presence in the Eucharist. A recent Pew study found that 70% of Catholics do not believe in the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. 70% of us. And the percentages add up because only 30% of Catholics attend Mass. So if you don't believe in the real presence of Jesus, then there would be no incentive or reason to attend Mass. You wouldn't believe that you are offending Jesus by not attending because you don't believe he's really present in the Eucharist to begin with. Francisco was aware that he was not going to live long, so he told Lucia and Jacinta, "It's okay, you go to school. I will stay with Jesus who is hidden. What good is it for me to learn, to read, if soon I will go to heaven?" So that's a lovely way to get out of going to school, right? Francisco would go to church to be as close to the tabernacle as possible and took delight in consoling Jesus, who was greatly offended by the sins of humanity. And Jacinta attended daily Mass with great desire of receiving Jesus in Holy Communion in reparation for sinners, nothing than to be in the real presence of Jesus. She said, "I love the Lord so much that sometimes I feel as if I had fire in my heart, but it does not burn me." Do we have fire in our hearts when we are in the real presence of Jesus? Let's then celebrate the Mass regularly and reverently and pray for the faith to believe in the real presence and to act accordingly. And finally, they teach us the power and the potential of sacrifices offered. Let's think for a moment of some of the sacrifices we have made in our lifetime and compare them to the sacrifices made by the children of Fatima. Many times our sacrifices, especially in Lent, involve giving up the extras. I'll give up my dessert, my chocolate, my coffee, my Starbucks coffee, my booze, my cigarettes, but those are the extras. The children of Fatima went without water on scorching hot days. They renounced their favorite games. They deprived themselves of food, often giving their lunches to their sheep or poor children. Once Jacinta found a cord. The children cut it into 3 pieces, and each child wore it tightened around their waist against their skin. They did this until Our Lady told them that, although Jesus was pleased with their sacrifice, he did not want them to wear the cords as they slept. Sacrifices, penances, or mortifications are always offered as a sign of adoration, gratitude, and supplication, such as for souls in purgatory or in reparation for sins, and they bear great merit. And the children teach us to ask Jesus and Mary this question: what do you want of me? Keep in mind that during all of the apparitions, Our Lady to the children of Fatima, all 3 saw Our Lady, but Francisco could not hear her. Jacinta saw her and listened, but did not speak to her. Lucia saw, listened, and talked to her, but she always began with these words: what do you want of me? We are quick to tell Mary and Jesus what we want, what we need, and when we want it. But do we ask, what do you ask of me? What is your will for me? And then follow it. And sometimes we have to wait. To conclude, some of us may wonder why we here at the National Center for Padre Pio pay tribute to Our Lady of Fatima in very significant ways. We do so because of the closeness of Padre Pio to Our Lady of Fatima. Keep in mind the timeline of the apparitions in comparison to Padre Pio receiving his stigmata. He was a young priest as the apparitions were actually taking place. I share with you now this very moving story of Padre Pio. Padre Pio became gravely ill on the evening of the 24th of April in 1959. By special concession of the Pope, the Pilgrim Virgin statue was brought to San Giovanni Rotondo by helicopter on August 5th. For 3 months, Padre Pio had been confined to bed. Against the wishes of his doctor, he had insisted on getting up, and he was carried by 2 strong friars from his room to the church where the statue was venerated. Dissolved in tears from pain and fever, a writer described, he knelt before his queen in prayer and reverently kissed the base of the famous image of Our Lady, and then returned to his bed. At 2:15, the helicopter took off, carrying the statue to other cities of Italy, but it circled the piazza and convento, in other words, where the priests lived, where Padre Pio could see Our Lady through his window. And he yelled at her, "Madonna mia," he moaned. "The day you arrived Italy, I became sick. Now you are leaving, and you leave me like this?" The pilot, as he pulled away, felt a sudden impulse to swing back toward the convento. Padre Pio himself tells us what happened. At that moment, I felt a shudder in my bones, and I was cured immediately. He got out of bed, went about his work as if healthy all his life, and he wrote the account of his cure in a letter to his superiors in Rome. Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day here at the National Center for Padre Pio. May Padre Pio bless us all. God bless.